constructed, deconstructed, reconstructed, accommodated, assimilated, so on and so forth, evolved and negotiated at various historical junctures. And this book also, and what I plan to do in this presentation, is to problematize the notions of Indianness through resistance, and particularly its links with India, and how socioeconomic and political factors shaped and defined and challenged Indian women to look beyond an ethnic, sometimes narrow identity, to embrace a more broader African identity rooted in the country of their birth and continent. So, due to time constraints, I'm just going to be very, very brief and just provide you a very quick overview, the key aspects that I draw from this publication. So, as I alluded to earlier, one of the key themes that permeates the book is the Indian identity, ways in which the Indian identity was constructed, negotiated at various historical junctures. Place of birth, history, and life experiences shaped and defined their positioning as Indian women. Also, notions of Indianness were nurtured and reinforced by both colonial and apartheid ideologies, which aimed at keeping the racial groups separate but equal. And the histories of apartheid we are all quite familiar with. So, women at the turn of the century who arrived as immigrants and whose histories, we are also quite familiar with, and Ashish did a brilliant critical examination of indentured women. So, who arrived as immigrants embraced the Indian identity with strong ties to India. And this was most noticeable in the Satyagraha campaigns between 1907 and 1930, once again, which we are all quite familiar with. So women were at the forefront of the struggle, and their participation must be viewed as at least one of the reasons was the shared identity with India. India, for many in the early years of indenture, was seen as the motherland, and upholding her dignity played a crucial role in mobilizing support for the 1913 campaign. Indian women who joined the struggle still had very strong links or affiliations with India, and they called upon women, for example, by Fatima Sheikh Mehta, one of the reasons to participate in the campaign itself was, quote, to be patriotic to Mother India, unquote, and participate in the struggle. So the youth amongst them, Baliama, Munsam, and Bule, was also prepared to die for, quote, the motherland. Gandhi's return to India in 1915 did not diminish the Indian connection to the formation of solidarities. During India's independence struggle, local newspapers such as the Indian Views, Indian Opinion, devoted much attention to the various Indian campaigns at the turn of the century, and the sense of belonging to the motherland was heightened as the national movement grew in stature. So the struggle certainly had a significant impact on South African Indian politics. The Indian community, strong links with the motherland can also be further discerned at the time of India's independence. Independence Day did not go unnoticed, but was celebrated. For example, in 1947, victory celebrations were held by the Hindu Seva Samaj in Pretoria with prayer meetings, and in Durban, Independence Day was celebrated at the Surat Hindu Association Hall. In 1948, a group of Indian women held anniversary celebrations at the Durban beachfront, chanting slogans of, I quote, "Long live Nehru, Jai Hind, and long live free India." In the 1940s, during the passive resistance campaign, South Africans Indians enlisted the support of India. The newly independent India took up the South African cause at the United Nations. It was one of the first countries to impose sanctions on the apartheid regime because of its racist policies. But their descendants born and raised in South Africa were less accommodating of the so-called Indian tag. The politics of citizenship evolved by the 1950s, and we can see this through the various defiance campaigns and the protest movements of the 1950s, and led to a rethinking of the Indian identity and how they were to position themselves as a community within the larger liberation struggle. By the 1970s, many Indians identified as Indian. Many Indians identified as Indian to embrace a by the 1970s, Indians began to embrace a broader identity, a South African identity. And this can be discerned from the narratives and activism of, for example, just to highlight a few women like Sam and Woodley, Asha Woodley, and many others who were part of the Black Consciousness Movement, the BCM. The student movement and the BCM of the 1970s influenced Indian women in terms of their identity, their political ideology, and activism. It had a significant impact on the lives of people like, and I just name a few, like Harshita Namaste, Asha Woodley, and many others during this period. And the BCM challenged them to look beyond their ethnic identity to embrace a broader African identity rooted in the country of their birth and continent. The culture of Africa, its lifestyle and its people became part of them. And this could not be, they could not conceive any other existence. South Africa to many was their home, and they knew no other home. And these kind of narratives emerged during my interviews with many of these activists. Alluding to how, allied to how the Indian identity evolved in the context of women's resistance was the interracial sisterhood at different historical periods. Colonial and apartheid history created differential oppressions. And this really differential resistance and imposed material differences amongst the race grouping. So the stirrings of interracial solidarity can be discerned as early as 1913 during the anti-pass campaigns in the Orange Free State, when the Indian opinions supported the anti-pass campaigns and expressed their solidarity with African women in the OFS. African colours and whites also expressed similar expressions of solidarity during the predominantly Indian campaign of the 1940s. In the 1930s and the 1940s, platforms like the Liberal Study Group, the Non-European United Front, and later on the Unity Movement, the National Liberation League, the South African Communist Party, and so forth, enabled Indian women to work closely with other oppressed groups. And from the 1950s onwards, interracial and interracial cooperation became firmly rooted, mainly through the formation of these various associations.